Imagine being locked away, not just as a prisoner of war, but as a living laboratory specimen. Stripped of your name, reduced to a number, and subjected to horrors that make the darkest nightmares seem merciful. In the frozen wastelands of occupied Manchuria, during the darkest days of World War II, one of history's most terrifying secrets unfolded behind barbed wire and guarded walls. A place where science wasn't used to heal, but to destroy. A factory of death where human beings were dissected alive, infected with plagues, and frozen in the name of imperial ambition. Today, we dive deep into the nightmare of Japan's Unit 731, the Japanese death camp that history tried to bury. If this story of unimaginable suffering and the fight for truth touches you, please hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications so you never miss an episode of Human Resilience Against Tyranny. Give this video a like if you believe these stories must be told, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. What shocked you the most? Share this with someone who needs to know the real cost of war and forgotten atrocities. Your support helps us bring more of these hidden truths to light. In the remote outskirts of Harbin, in the puppet state of Manchukuo, what is now northeast China, a massive complex rose in the 1930s under the guise of an epidemic prevention and water purification department. To the outside world, it looked like a legitimate research facility. But inside, behind high walls, electrified fences, and constant patrols, it was something far more sinister. Unit 731, commanded by the ruthless microbiologist Shiro Ishii. This was no ordinary prison camp. It was a living hell, designed for human experimentation on an industrial scale. Prisoners, mostly Chinese civilians, but also Russians, Koreans, Mongolians, and even some allied POWs, were referred to coldly as maruta, meaning logs. They were no longer people. They were raw material for the Imperial Japanese Army's quest for biological weapons. The camp sprawled across vast grounds with dozens of buildings, laboratories, prisons, crematoria, and testing fields. Estimates suggest that between 3,000 and 12,000 or more individuals perished there directly from experiments, with hundreds of thousands more dying from field tests of the weapons developed inside. Life, if you could call it that, for the prisoners, began with dehumanization. Captured off the streets, from battlefields, or rounded up as suspected partisans, they arrived in secret transports. Stripped, examined, numbered, and locked in cells that were little better than cages. Guards and scientists viewed them with clinical detachment. Families were torn apart. Children and pregnant women were not spared. The atmosphere was one of constant dread, the smell of disinfectants mixed with the metallic tang of blood, the distant screams echoing through the corridors at night, and the ever-present fear of being selected for the next procedure. One of the most infamous practices was vivisection. Prisoners were infected with deadly pathogens like plague, anthrax, cholera, typhoid, or tularemia. Once the disease took hold, doctors would perform autopsies while the victims were still alive, often without anesthesia, to study the progression in real time. Testimonies from former members and rare survivor accounts describe scenes of unimaginable agony. Men, women, and children strapped to tables, their bodies cut open as researchers observed organ failure, all while the subjects remained conscious. Limbs were amputated to test blood loss or frostbite treatments. Frostbite experiments involved exposing prisoners to sub-zero temperatures, sometimes dousing limbs in icy water and then thawing them to study gangrene. The camp had specialized wards. In one area, prisoners were locked in pressure chambers to simulate high-altitude conditions for aviation research. Their eyes would bulge, blood vessels rupture, until they died. In others, they were burned with flamethrowers, exposed to poison gas, or injected with horse urine or other substances to test reactions. Women were subjected to forced pregnancies and then experimented on, their babies used as additional test subjects. There are accounts of infants being infected or even used in grenade tests. Beyond the walls, Unit 731 conducted field tests. Plague-infected fleas were bred in massive quantities and dropped from aircraft over Chinese villages and cities. Contaminated food, water, and clothing were distributed. Entire communities were wiped out in these experiments, leading to epidemics that killed tens or hundreds of thousands. The goal? Perfecting biological weapons for use against enemies. The cold, calculating efficiency of the operation turned death into a production line. Daily life in the camp was a brutal routine designed to break body and spirit. Prisoners received minimal food, just enough to keep them alive for experimentation. Overcrowded cells, disease-ridden conditions, and backbreaking labor in support roles added to the torment. Informants among prisoners ensured no resistance. Escape was nearly impossible. The perimeter was heavily guarded, and the surrounding area hostile. Those who tried were often recaptured and made examples of, publicly tortured or used in even more gruesome tests. As the war turned against Japan in 1945, the horrors intensified. With Soviet forces advancing, the Japanese tried to cover their tracks. Prisoners were executed en masse, buildings were dynamited, evidence was burned. Many remaining logs were killed to prevent them from revealing the truth. One young Japanese Youth Corps member, Hideo Shimizu, who was only 14 at the time, later recounted being tasked with collecting and disposing of charred bones from the cremated remains, a haunting memory that stayed with him for decades. The scale was staggering. Satellite imagery and declassified documents today reveal the layout: prison blocks, labs, an airfield for weapon dispersal tests, and massive incinerators. Former members later testified in trials, like the Khabarovsk war crime trials in 1949, admitting to the systematic murder and experimentation. Yet, shockingly, many leaders, including Ishii, escaped full justice. The United States granted immunity in exchange for the research data, which was seen as valuable in the emerging Cold War. This deal allowed some perpetrators to live quietly, while victim stories were suppressed for years. But truth has a way of surfacing. Defectors, rare survivors, and courageous whistleblowers from within Japan itself, including aging veterans confronting their past, have pieced together the full picture. Museums in China now stand as memorials on the ruins. Books, documentaries, and testimonies keep the memory alive. The story of Unit 731 is not just about one camp. It's a warning about what happens when humanity is subordinated to ideology, empire, and unchecked power. Think of the individuals behind the numbers. A young Chinese father dragged away from his family, injected with bacteria, watching his body betray him in agony. A Russian prisoner, far from home, enduring frostbite tests in the bitter Manchurian winter. A mother forced to give birth in captivity, only for her child to become another data point. Their screams, their silent pleas for mercy that never came, these echo through history. The camp's legacy is one of profound inhumanity, comparable in its calculated evil to the worst atrocities of the 20th century. It reminds us that freedom is fragile, and vigilance against tyranny is eternal. For those who survived the war and the long silence afterward, speaking out became an act of defiance and redemption. As the gates of history slowly open to reveal these buried truths, we honor the victims by remembering them, not as logs, but as fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, whose lives were stolen in the name of a mad quest for dominance. Their suffering calls us to value human dignity above all else and to stand against any regime that treats people as disposable. If this story moved you to anger at injustice or gratitude for the freedoms we hold today, please like, subscribe, and comment below with "Never Forget" or your reflections. Share it widely so these voices are heard. What other hidden histories should we explore next? Let me know. Your input shapes our channel. Thank you for watching, for caring, and for joining this journey into the shadows so we can all step into the light of awareness and hope. Stay strong, seek truth, and until next time, may we build a world where such camps never exist again. God bless, and see you in the next episode.